Welcome to the Fearfully and Wonderfully Me podcast, a podcast designed to help you increase your influence, develop your leadership, and maximize your results. Today's podcast episode is one of a series of podcast episodes I recorded with my husband, Mac Story, on a book that we co-wrote together, Change Happens, Leading Yourself and Others Through Change. I know you'll enjoy the leadership principles that Mac brings to the Fearfully and Wonderfully Me podcast, so be sure to follow Mac on social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, or Twitter at Mac Story, or subscribe to the Blue Collar Leadership podcast for more on the leadership principles that Mac teaches.
So Rhea and I are really excited to talk about this on this podcast series and talk about Change Happens, Leading Yourself and Others Through Change. We wrote that book together, so we're going to do this podcast series together, and I think it's going to be pretty cool. Rhea brings a lot to the table. I got a lot of background related to leading people through change, and we got a lot of change going on, don't we, Rhea?
Absolutely. You know, the one thing that 2020 brought everybody, whether there were some positives or some negatives or some of both, the one thing that 2020 brought everybody is lots and lots of change.
Lot of change. So I guess I'll just give everyone a little bit of my background. Most people have been listening to me on my podcast, probably know that between 05 and 08, or excuse me, 05 and 2012, I led leaders and their teams through over 11,000 hours of process improvement, organizational change, cultural transformation, and in the manufacturing space. So that's where I learned the most about the subject that we're going to be talking about. And on my podcast in 2020, my theme is going to be change. So every podcast, except for the very first one, you and I did that together on your book, Primetime, The Power of Effective Planning. We did a year-end episode where I interviewed you, and then we did one where second part was the open to 2021. So all the rest of them this year, though, for me, are going to be on change. So tell us why is this? Introduce this to the folks, Rhea.
Well, you know, it's interesting because Change Happens is one of the most requested topics that you and I get asked to speak on because it's so relevant to everybody, whether it's personal or professional, right? We're all experiencing change on some level. Change is constant, it's always happening. And the thing about change is that most of us don't really like it unless it's our idea, right? Most of us don't like change because we as humans just like to get comfortable. I mean, it's just our nature, right? We spend our time in high school and we can't wait to get out so that we can get comfortable, and we spend our time in college and we can't wait to get done studying and graduate so that we can get a job we like in a house we like and get comfortable. And then we can't wait to retirement so that we can quit the job that we wanted to get and get comfortable, right? It's part of our human nature, I think, to seek a status quo, a comfort, a stability where things are just steady. But the problem with that is that doesn't help us be successful in life, right? Because conditions around us are constantly changing. And if we don't learn and grow and adapt to them, then it's impossible for us to reach our potential personally. It's impossible for us to be most successful professionally. And so learning how to overcome ourselves is one of the biggest tools that we can, embrace and grab onto and learn how to respond to change effectively and leverage it and adapt to it.
Yeah, so I hope everybody grabs a copy of the book. We're going to talk about a lot on here that's not in the book, and so we spend a lot of time trying to put a lot of stuff in a small space in that book. If you're not familiar with the book, it's 30 chapters, 3 pages per chapter, but there's 15 sections in there. And what's cool about it, so there's 2 chapters in each section, and Rhea opens the first chapter in each section, really talking about personal change, dealing with change, on a personal level. And then I kind of transition it. I still talk about dealing with it on a personal level too, but then I bring in other people. So dealing with it personally while you're dealing with other people, and then also leading other people through change. So during this podcast series, that's why we're going to do 15 15 episodes, but during this podcast series, we're both going to talk about some combination of all of it, leading ourselves and leading others and dealing with others who are going through change. And I mean, most people resist change. Most people resist it, and it hurts them, hurts their personal brand, who they are. It diminishes their influence, because how we deal with change, especially when our leaders are trying to change the organization for the better and we're resisting change, we're losing influence. Someone else is getting the influence that we wish we had, and that makes us even more angry sometimes. So this is a proactive approach to increasing your influence when change happens. We know in 2020 it was crazy. It's still crazy in 2021. There's always something crazy going on, but 2020 and 2021 has really been something unique. So organizations and people need the principles that we're going to teach in here. They apply everywhere. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. If you're in blue collar or white collar, it doesn't make any difference. Doesn't matter if you're talking about dealing with stuff at home or stuff at work. So it's really a pretty cool chapter. On the back of the book, that there's a opening quote at the top. Actually, not a quote, but the opening line on the back of the book says, "The biggest frustration in leading change is overcoming resistance to change." So if you're talking about it from a personal level, you got to lead yourself to overcome resistance to change when you understand how much it's hurting your influence. But when you're leading other people, if you're the formal authority leader or you're leading your family, you're leading them through change, you got to know how to lead others in a way that helps them overcome resistance. So we're going to kick off today in episode 1 of this podcast. We're going to talk about the first section in the book. And the first section in this book is Nothing Fails Like Success. That's a powerful one right there. Nothing fails like success. And I remember I learned that or heard that from Dr. Stephen Covey, the author of The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. What's that mean to you, Rhea?
To me, when I think of nothing fails like success, we typically as humans, we figure out what worked or what works, and we tend to repeat that behavior. And that's logical, right? It worked, it helped us be successful, so let's keep doing it. But see, nothing fails like success because we don't learn as much from success. And so when we tend to repeat what helped us get to this point because we think it's going to help us continue to be successful, that assumes conditions around us stay the same. And that's an incorrect assumption, right? Things around us are constantly changing. So if we repeat the same behaviors and the same actions, assuming that everything else is going to be the same, but everything else changes, what was enough to help us be successful today is not enough to help us be successful tomorrow. And we see this over and over in sports. I like to use the analogy of, you've probably seen a football game where halftime comes and one team is way ahead and one team is behind. That's not unusual. But what's interesting is that they go into the locker room at halftime and they come out after halftime and something changes. A lot of times you see this. The team that was doing so good and way ahead tends to repeat what was working for them, right? It was working for them. Let's keep doing it. They probably got a pep talk from the coach. Keep doing it. This is working. Keep going. We're ahead. We're beating. And the team that was behind goes into the locker room and they get the talk that says, hey, this is not working. We've got to do something differently. And a lot of times what happens is that team that was behind comes out of the locker room, they do something differently, and they go on to end up winning the football game. Now, that's not always what happens, but every time it does happen, what happened to that team that was successful and then they ultimately lost the game. What happened to them is they said, it's helped us get this far. Let's keep doing it. But nothing fails like success. And if we keep doing the same thing, assuming to get the same results, ultimately we will not be successful.
Excuse me. That's a great example, Rhea. And I always like to say, I always heard this growing up. A lot of people maybe have heard this, but I always heard that if you always do what you always done, you'll always get what you always got. And it fits perfectly right here with this chapter. I don't know if I even put this in the book, but I'm putting it in the podcast. But if you always do what you always done, you'll always get what you always got. People say that, and other people nod their head and agree with it, but I don't agree with it. I think it's absolutely false, because if we always do what we always done, But the people we're competing with, it could be co-workers or it could be other organizations. If we're talking about it at the organizational level, if they're trying to get better personally or organizationally, and we're just doing what we've always done, we're not going to get what we always got. Those folks are going to get more. They're going to get more of my influence. If it's personal, they're going to get influence. I'm going to lose influence, or they're going to get customers, may get my customers, or they're going to get new customers that I didn't get because I'm just holding steady with what worked so well in the past. So always do what you always done, not going to get you what you always got. You're going to get less because there's a lot of people out there trying to get better, to do a better job. So I want to read a quote from chapter 1 from Dr. Stephen Covey, author of The 7 Habits. He says, when a challenge in life is met by a response that is equal to it, you have success. But when the challenge moves to a higher level, the old, once successful response no longer works. It fails. Thus, nothing fails like success. I mean, that's the line we took the name of this chapter from, and we'll make sure to give him credit right there. And that's why we have it in the book as well. But the problem with success and why it's often the precursor to downfall is because success often doesn't teach us anything. What do you think about that, Rick?
Yeah, and it's true. We tend to learn as humans. Our learning model is figuring out what didn't work, and that's how we figure out, well, let me try something else. What does work? So when we figure out something that works, we don't learn as much from it, right? We learn more from our failures and more from our mistakes. Now, success isn't a bad thing. It's just that it tends to not bring us as much important information. It doesn't teach us anything. And success today is one of the biggest threats of future success, because there again, it's easy to slip into that complacency and say, this worked for me yesterday, this worked for me today, I'm going to keep doing it tomorrow. But that just assumes that conditions around us are going to stay the same, and that complacency is such an easy trap to fall into, right? As I said, we like to get comfortable, but complacency doesn't reward us either personally or professionally.
Yeah, and that goes back to those 11,000 hours that I was leading organizations through. Most of them were doing great. Most of the operations, I worked in manufacturing, and most of them were doing great. The companies were doing great. The processes we were working on were working fine. Everything's going great. But success today is one of the biggest threats to future success, and it takes a high impact leader to understand that we need to change and get better and invest money and invest time when everything's working right. Because a lot of managers of people, they just want to rake in the profit. Leaders of people want to realize we're going to get some profit, but we need to get some profit next week, next year, next month, and that sort of stuff. So a lot of people in 2020 and moving into 2021 have realized that what got them to where they were is not going to take them to where they want to be, and may not even keep them where they are. A lot of people didn't prepare. They were resting on their success. They were not prepared for things to change. A lot of people went out of business. A lot of people lost jobs. At a personal level, a lot of people lost jobs and didn't have any savings in the bank. They weren't prepared to lose their job. Maybe they've been working there 20 years and everything was going smooth. Nothing feels like success. Living check to check. Maybe you've been successful living check to check. But when things change and you don't have a check, life's going to get rough. So there's all kinds of ways to see this principle on a personal level. And it takes a high impact leader with a high degree of character to actually go in to motivate and inspire people who don't want to change to actually get engaged with changing, to be proactive, using another term from Dr. Covey, being proactive with the change. Nothing feels like trying to remain the same in a changing world. That's basically what we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Because things around us are constantly changing. People are changing, processes, customers, products, the demand changes, suppliers, expectations. So many other things are changing constantly. So from an organizational standpoint, as a leader, we've got to have the vision and say, I know change is coming. And as an individual, we can have the same mindset of saying, I know change is coming. What should I be doing now to prepare myself to be better equipped to meet those challenges, those changes in the future? What should I be doing today so that I can be quicker to adapt, so that I'm more prepared to adapt? And that comes down to the daily growth of the individual, and really honestly the daily growth of the leader.
Absolutely. And when I led those teams, I would basically go in. I'd show up on Monday. I'd get a new team, and a lot of them never worked together as a team. But basically a group of people, and they don't want to change. Everything's working good. Some of them work in the area, so they definitely don't want to change. They don't want a bunch of outsiders come in to change. So what you're just talking about is, and what we're talking about with this book is it's one of the reasons that I was excited when we decided to write this book. Was it helps establish the mindset.
Mm,
Most people just hope. Most leaders just hope that their team accepts and deals with change, because they're constantly leading change. Whoever the leaders are, whether it's the leader of a small department or the leader of an organization, the owner of an organization, if the owners of the organizations are leading through change and leading change and implementing change, then there's another layer, multiple layers of leaders below them who have to carry it out. So leaders at every level are trying to get people to buy in, and most of them are dealing with a strategy of hope. Hope's not a
mm,
good strategy when you deal with change. Just like all this change in 2020 and 2021 is happening. Most leaders have not done any change training. They hadn't, and I'm talking about mindset, what stuff we're going to talk about in this series. Most leaders have never done this. So they had to deal with people at all levels in the organization who were not prepared to lead themselves well through change.
mm.
What's crazy is they're constantly changing. Every organization is constantly changing, just like you rattled off that list of all the stuff that's changing a minute ago. And yet, most organizations are not doing anything proactive on the front end to help people learn how to think their way through change. And that's when I led those teams. When I show up on Monday, we had to have it executed change by Friday. Not talked
Mm.
about a plan. We had to actually do it. 95 to 98% of the time, it was a develop a plan, implement it, validate it in 5 days. I walk in with a group of strangers who don't like me, don't like change, didn't like the last consultant and all that sort of stuff. And how did I actually do that? Was I focused 20% of that week on mindset of the people. The first 4 hours on Mondays was teaching them stuff like this. We didn't have this book. I didn't have this book. Obviously, we hadn't written it, but I wish I would have had this book. This is a book I would have pulled a whole lot of stuff from and talked to them about. But I taught them all kind of other stuff from other people's books and told them where I got it from, shared it with them, and got their mindset right. So they were ready to work with each other, ready to work with me, ready to make change. And they understood that, we're going to talk about this later in the book, but I'm going to say it right here because this is what it's about. When change happens, some people whine, some people shine. And the ones who
That
shine,
is so good.
that's pretty good, ain't it, Rick?
It is.
And so when change happens, somebody's going to shine, somebody's going to whine. And most people whine. That's
Mm,
why it is so easy to shine. If you got the mindset and understand why, I mean, it's when you talk about it on a personal level, it's a competitive advantage for you to get promoted,
absolutely.
to get raises, to get recognition, to be involved, to have influence in what the change is going to be. When you shine, you get to be a part of the change. You get to lead it. You get to champion it. And the leaders who are responsible, you become their best friend. When you're talking about building your brand, you want to shine or you want to whine? That's what I know what I want to do. What do you want to do, Rick?
I want to shine too. That reminds me of a quote. I think we used it in the book. I'm going to read it here. Alvin Toffler says, the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And that's really what you're talking about there. When change happens, you can learn and unlearn and relearn, and you'll shine. You'll stand out as someone who's willing to adapt and embrace change and lead change. But if you spend your time whining and moaning and groaning and you're not willing to unlearn and relearn, then you just get left behind. I mean, I know people who didn't want to use a smartphone, who still don't want to use a smartphone, right? But think of how much that's changed. I mean, you can't text your kids or your grandkids if you don't have a smartphone, right? But how much communication are you missing out? How much influence are you missing out? And yet I know people even today who aren't willing to go through that change, who just aren't willing to unlearn and relearn, and we lose influence, right? That's what it really comes down to. We as people always want more influence, even if we haven't thought about it. And how we respond to change is really determining our personal influence and our professional influence.
That's good stuff, Rhea.
Yeah,
It's,
it is good stuff. And it's not easy to do. I think, Mac, you've you were better at embracing change earlier on, right? I had to learn the hard way because I know there were some times I didn't want to embrace change. I didn't like when things changed. And I think as people, we sometimes, some of us struggle with that more than others. I struggled with it a little more early on. I remember one time I came home from work and you had like all the kitchen cabinets open and you were pulling dishes and stuff out. And I was like, what are you doing? And you're like, well, if I move my plates here and the bread here and rearrange the pantry, I can make my tuna fish sandwich more efficiently every day from lunch when I come home from work. And I was like, oh no, you are not changing my kitchen. I don't care about the tuna sandwich, right? And that story reminds me of just you saw an opportunity for an improvement. You're like, hey, let's change where the dishes are at. And I'm like, no, I don't want to change where the dishes are at. So I think that's one of the reasons you were so successful at leading these teams through process improvement, because you have just a more natural ability to adapt to change. So it's one reason I loved writing the book, is because I share a lot of my struggles where I got it wrong, where I didn't adapt quickly, and I paid the price, the consequences.
yeah, change is tough. There's a lot of people who got a lot of health problems out there.
Mm.
They can fix them. All they have to do is change. But till they change their values, nothing's going to change. So they have to value changing instead of value everything remaining the same. But I think you're right. I have, uh, I guess it's a blessing, if you want to call it that, that I really do like change. There's some things I don't like to change, but most things I really like change. I naturally try to make things better. And that irritates a lot of people because a lot of people like to have everything remain the same. And especially in the workplace, a lot of people just want to come in, do their work, go home. But for that company to thrive, they got to change. If they don't change, they're going to take a dive. If they change, they're going to thrive. If they change in the right way. Change just for the sake of change is no good. But change for the right reason, in the right way, at the right time, is going to take you to an entirely different level. Woodrow Wilson, he says, if you want to make enemies, try to change something. And there's a lot of leaders, they're making enemies because they haven't grown and developed the people, develop their mindset so that they want to embrace change, so that they see the benefit. Whenever we speak, we do it together. Whenever we speak, and I ask people when we're talking about this subject, and I say, how many of you out there want to raise your hand and say, I want to be a whiner? I want to be a whiner.
Nobody.
Nobody ever raises their hand, do they, Rhea?
Of course not.
But when I ask them, and I tell them, you ain't got to answer this out loud, but when change happens, what do? Do you go support the leader? Do you say, how can I help you? Do you start learning about the new stuff? Do you lead the way, or do you turn around, start whining to whoever's sitting beside you when you hear the news that we got to change, or whoever's standing beside you? We got to look in the mirror. If we want to get better, we got to look in the mirror. And if we want to lead other people well, so that they lead themselves well through change, you got to do it on the front end. It's too late. When the change happens, you're going to get whatever somebody's got on the inside of them. So proactive leaders, that's why this material we're going to cover in this podcast series is going to be good for you as a person. It's going to be good for you, especially if you lead other people.
When it's applied, just like anything, it's not just the knowing, right? It's that we actually have to do something with that knowledge. And so, yeah, nothing fails like success. I know the next chapter in the next episode, we're really going to get into the impact of change. And But there again, these principles are very powerful, just like you said, when we do something with them.
Yeah, we started off the book with Nothing Fails Like Success. We started off, obviously, the podcast. We're following the layout of the book. But the reason that is we got to get you engaged. We're working on your mindset. If you're going to follow us through this 15-part series, we got to help you go through it so you understand it. But I hope you get the book. And if you lead a group of people, if you're the formal authority leader, whenever you're leading change, which is probably every day, and you develop or witness resistance in your organization, look in the mirror. What kind of development on this type of content have you done with them? That's what high impact leadership is about, looking in the mirror and saying, I'm responsible. If the people I lead resist change, what have I not done that I should have done? That's what high impact leadership is about. So, and you may not lead anybody today, but you may be leading somebody in the future. So as you go through this, look at it from a personal standpoint, and then look at it from a leader of others standpoint. One thing I want to tell you too, we got this on audio book. It's pretty cool. Rhea and I got a male and female narrator for that.
Husband and wife team, yeah.
Yeah, so they follow along. You know, in Rhea's chapter, the lady reads, and in my chapter, the man reads. So if you want to get this on audio, it's pretty engaging because it flips back and forth. So hope you enjoyed this opening episode to this series. And like Rhea said, we're going to be talking about the impact of change. So Nothing Fails Like Success. Next episode, we'll be talking about the impact of change. You got anything, Rhea?
I think you've said it all. Looking forward to the next episode.
All right. Talk to you next time.